Hi, my name is John.
And my name is Lloyd.
And we're the hosts of The Pint,
a pop culture podcast.
Lloyd, if you had to tell any of the people out there that might be listening to The Pint for the first time about anything unsavory or disconcerting we might do on the show, what would you warn them about?
Well, sometimes we drop spoilers, and sometimes we swear like motherfucking sailors.
Fuck yeah, we do. You heard it from him. You've been warned.
Listen in.
Says he was on the war ring!
You! Climb aboard!
Hey! Hey! I got his boot! I got the blood bag's boot! Take me! I got his boot!
Hey there, everybody out there in Pint World. It is me, John, and with me,
it's Gary.
That's right. We found him in the wreckage of the Titanic. The last time we had him on was the 300th episode where we talked all about Titanic. Here we are, I don't know, 40 some odd episodes later, and Gary's back. He was drawn like one of Jack's French girls. He survived the sinking, and we found him underneath a door in the middle of the Atlantic. Gary, what's going on, man?
Not much. How you doing, John?
I'm doing good. So this episode is what we call an insider dedication. What an insider dedication is we have our Pint Insiders. Those are the folks that give us a little bit of extra support on Patreon and get all kinds of extra goodies over on our special Patreon page called the Pint Insider. We offer requests where people can say, hey, do this episode for us, and we'll do it. But the dedication is a little bit different. What I do is I dig into what somebody out there loves a lot, and I surprise them with an episode. So this episode was easier than some of the other ones. Some of the other ones I look on Letterboxd and try to find a movie that someone enjoys. Very recently, we did the Iron Man episode for Vinny, and that was by me going on Letterboxd, seeing that Vinny had given Iron Man 5 stars, and saying, hey, that'll be a nice surprise for Vinny. He obviously loves Iron Man. This episode is for our good buddy over at the Countdown Podcast, Paul Prezulta. And Paul, on every single episode of the fucking of his podcast, mentions Mad Max Fury Road. This guy is obsessed with this movie. It's a 5-star movie on his Letterboxd. And I'm not kidding when I say that he mentions it on just about every fucking episode. You could drink to this, by the way. Paul and Wayne, two of my favorite podcasters, probably my favorite podcast in all honesty, are coming to an end in November. Lloyd and I will be doing an episode with them. I will tell you the subject at the time, closer to the time. But we love those guys, and I said, you know what? Let's pull one out for Paul. So we're going to be talking all about 2015's Mad Max Fury Road.
Hey! Fire it up! Fire it up! Fire it up! Fire it up!
The reason we bring Gary back is because Gary's got a particular set of likes in his life. One of them is G.I. Joe, if you didn't know that. Chaplin's Assistant Motor Pod. We'll talk all about that at the end of the show. The nerdy little brother to the Pint, and a fantastic show that I love very much. But besides G.I. Joe, Gary has a real love for hot rod culture, and in particular, the Mad Max series of films. Now, we have done on the Pint the original 1979 and the sequel. And Gary's been here for both of them. So I have a standing rule that any Mad Max movie we do, Gary will be attached to. So we are doing Fury Road. I had to bring Gary along. The Manster's not here. I know it's fairly common. Manster's in and out sometimes, got a very busy life. The Manster's actually on vacation in Ireland with his beautiful girlfriend, Candy. So I'm sure he would have loved to be on this one, but he couldn't make it. So let's get into it a little bit. May 15th of 2015 is when they released Mad Max Fury Road. It was directed by George Miller and co-written by George Miller. George Miller is the creator of the character of Mad Max and the director of all the films that have been in this franchise. You might know him from other things, though, such as Babe, Babe, Pig in the City, Happy Feet, and the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet segment of the Twilight Zone movie. So if you like that John Lithgow remake of the William Shatner television show that they did as one segment, that was directed by our man George Miller. He had some co-writers on this movie. One of them is a gentleman named Brendan McCarthy, who is actually more considered a designer and a co-writer. Okay. So the first thing to kind of really make sense of all the writing of this is that George Miller had an idea in the 90s for the fourth Mad Max movie. And here's the idea: a chase scene, a 2-hour-long chase scene. And what he did was he started designing and drawing storyboards before they did anything with a script. So the script ended up becoming based on his original storyboards. And we'll get into a little bit of the delayed making of this movie in a bit. So Brendan McCarthy was a comic writer. He worked on 2000 AD. He did some Judge Dredd stuff. 2000 AD had some spin-off titles. One was called Crisis. One was called Revolver. He was involved in those. He did design work for films. He did design work for Lloyd's favorite Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film from 1990. He did design work for the original Highlander. He also did design work for Coneheads, the Coneheads film. The other co-writer of this film is a gentleman named Nico Lathoris, a very Greek gentleman, by the way. And the only other writing credit I could find for him is that he co-wrote this year's Mad Max film, the poorly received and about to be streaming as of today, tomorrow, Mad Max Furiosa, or Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, I think they ended up calling it. Originally, when they made Fury Road, they wanted to film this and Furiosa back to back, and that didn't happen. There was a lot of issues on the Fury Road production. Gary, you're familiar with all this, right?
Yeah, I remember first being introduced to Fury Road in 1998.
Yeah. And when did it come out? I said 15, right? 2015?
2015, yeah.
So here are some of the starts and stops they had with this film that I wrote down. There's a lot more, but you know, we're just here to give you an hour-long show. Originally, it was conceived to be a linear, I guess, sequel for Mel Gibson, but 9/11/01 had a real effect, I guess, on the Australian dollar. There were some economy issues due to 9/11, and the original budget got all screwy because of this, so they had to shelve it. But they had started designing for this movie back then. They were going to film it in 2003. When they finally started to get their shit together, Gibson had aged out of the character, and also, as George Miller said, he was having some tumultuous times in his life, aka he hates Jewish people. But anyways, besides that, at one point, Gary, did you know this? It was reconsidered as an animated feature.
That makes sense because of what they did with the Animatrix.
Yeah. So they at one point were going to make this not with Gibson voicing Mad Max. They were going to make this an animated feature, but then budget stuff kind of moved around and they were able to get it back to live action. Now, one of the reasons that George Miller said he didn't mind changing from Mel Gibson to another actor, we'll get to that actor in a second, is because he feels like there are no real chronological ties between these movies. Now, I think he's wrong about that because Mad Max, The Road Warrior, and Thunderdome, even though it's tenuous, there is a through line through the three. But he feels like this is just like a story about a guy named Max and the world he lives in. How do you feel about that whole idea that this might not be necessarily like, okay, this is a sequel to this, to a sequel to this?
I think that it's kind of like the whole George Lucas thing of like, oh yeah, I always had this planned. And, you know, next thing you know, it's like you find out he really didn't have any of this planned. But I think George Miller's a little more organized than Lucas. I really think, you know, you look at the original trilogy, Fall of Civilization. I don't know what you'd call the second thing, Total Anarchy. And then the third movie, Beyond Thunderdome, is the rebuilding of civilization.
Right.
And this one kind of comes in as an anthology type movie. It turns this from going from like sequel to sequel to sequel. It opens it up to being more like James Bond. where you don't have to, until the Daniel Craig, you could watch the James Bond movies out of order and pretty much enjoy them for what they were. And Fury Road kind of redirects the Mad Max saga in that vein. The other thing too you're talking about, I hope we get to the comic books that DC
100%.
So all of a sudden you get a little bit of backfilling of why the Interceptor comes back. You get a little bit of the backstory for Furiosa. And also you get like the wordsmith or the word teller, the guy with all the tattoos with all the words on them. You get a real deep dive into the world. But like I said, this opens it up as an anthology, and it also opens up to Mel Gibson has aged out. Mel Gibson has been on record and saying, I'm not going to return to Mad Max. He feels that he's beyond the role now for whatever personal Jewish hating reasons he has. But more importantly, like I said, it opens it up. So now you could have Tom Hardy as Max.
Right.
And when Tom Hardy doesn't return, you could have, somebody else that would fit that gruff and grizzled nature to be an actor in the movie. So you open it up to, and if you're thinking like somebody that owns the IP, like I believe George Miller does or Warner Brothers does. But you think about that as owning the IP. Now you're opening up more cash revenue because you're not tied to this saga. It's like, oh yeah, we'll make one in like another 10 years.
Right.
We need to get some money going. There's some practical applications, whereas, for this, where like you said, he's like, oh yeah, it's like, I don't, it's like the Lucas thing. It's like, I don't really think so. I think you really expected it, 1, 2, 3. And then you kind of had an idea for this fourth one, but you changed your mind at that time when you wanted to make a fourth movie. And whatever your reason for telling this story or to make this 2-hour chase scene is fine by me because, as a lover of Max, I want more Max.
Yeah. And one of the things that a lot of people ask about this movie is this a reboot, a remake? Is this part of the whole thing? The comics that you mentioned, which I read, DC Vertigo put out way back then, in 2015, the last two follow Max as he leaves. It's at the end of Thunderdome, and he ends up at another miniature Thunderdome competition where he wins this new vehicle. So this, in my eyes, that says this is the same character. When we meet him in the very beginning of the movie, he's got long hair. It kind of ties to what we saw. Now, I know what you're saying. It does fit into the anthology thing, but I think that there's supposed to be a connection because I've heard a fan theory. I don't know if you've ever heard this, that some people think that he's the feral kid.
Yep, I've heard that one. And that's been debunked by George Miller himself.
Yeah.
And thanks for reminding me of the storyline. It has been 9 years since I've read those comics.
Yeah. There's also a great, I don't know who put it out. I own it. There's also a great art of Fury Road book. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not, where it's a bunch of comic book artists who just did their renditions of different characters and vehicles and scenes from this movie. I've got to dig it out before this episode comes out, take some pictures of it because it is fucking awesome. It is awesome. All right, a couple more things. We mentioned Tom Hardy, obviously. A couple actors that were considered for Max Rockatansky who were not brought in, obviously. Jeremy Renner at one point. Problematic cannibal Army Hammer, possible cannibal. I'm sorry, Army, possible cannibal. And he didn't want to leave America to film in Australia and Namibia, but Eminem was at one point considered for this role, but was very hesitant to leave the country for that long to film this movie. So this movie, this is crazy. Margaret Sixel is George Miller's wife, and she edited this film and won an Oscar for it. She had never edited a action movie before, and she said the reason she did it is because she wanted to have a woman give it a go as opposed to a man for a different point of view. 470 hours of footage were shot for this movie. They said it would take 3 months to watch it all, is how much fucking footage was shot for this movie. So she won the Oscar for putting it together the way she did. This is the second sequel ever to win, or I'm sorry, second sequel ever to be nominated for a Best Picture when the first movies of the series were not nominated at all. So this movie got nominated. The first three did not. The other movie that did it first was Toy Story 3. The first two were not nominated. Toy Story 3 was. So there's some interesting factoids about it. Filming, this is another part that's crazy. It was filmed in Sydney and Penrith, New South Wales, Australia, but mostly in the Namibian desert. The Nambia Desert is what it says here, if I'm reading that correctly. Between June of 2012 and December of 2012. This movie came out in 2015. Took fucking 3 years to come out.
It did.
They filmed the scenes at Immortan Joe's complex in September to November of 13. So there was a year apart where they did the desert chase scenes and then the scenes at the sanctuary or whatever you want to call it. Let's get into the cast of this film.
Shabuya roll call.
All right, as mentioned before, and for the first time credited in the credits as Max Rockatansky, is Tom Hardy. You might know Tom Hardy from the film Star Trek Nemesis, Inception, and you might know him from Warrior, a favorite movie of mine. Tom Hardy famously did not get along with Charlize Theron or George Miller during this movie. Charlize Theron also had issues with George Miller. In interviews, Hardy and Theron said that they could not tell what the fuck they were making. They didn't put their trust in him fully. And then Hardy, after seeing the film, apologized to Miller nonstop at a movie premiere. And even in an interview said, I was difficult on this movie because I didn't feel like we were doing anything. We had whole days where nothing made sense to me. And then he saw the finished product and was like, fuck, what the fuck? This guy knew what he was doing. Miller, by the way, had a strict edict on this movie that he wanted everything to be as bright and colorful as possible because he didn't want it to be the whole kind of post-apocalyptic washed out thing, right? If you think about The Road's a good movie, very depressing. I'll never watch it again, but it's almost in black and white. Now, it's funny that he did that because he originally wanted to put this out in black and white. And eventually he did put it out. I think it's called the Blood and Chrome edition. You can get on Blu-ray where there's a black and white version of this. I kind of wish I'd bought it when it was out because I looked it up yesterday. It's out of print and it's fucking expensive as hell. Gary, do you have that by any chance or no?
No, I would say because of the color used in this movie, that black and white would do a disservice.
I agree.
The color really makes this stand out.
Yeah.
By far. The other thing too, maybe it was just me or maybe it's because me watching it on my screen, but the opening scene had that graininess of film after Max, and I don't want to get too much into the plot, but there's a point where Max looks out as the War Boys are going after him, and then he sees the war truck taking off, and then immediately the screen clarifies and gets much more, modern, digital technology. And, to go into the editing thing, where was it going?
You're stunned by this movie.
I watched this 2 nights ago, and I watched this about bedtime. Now I thought about doing the John thing of watching half of it and then watching the next half the next night. This movie did not, ever give me a chance to say, oh, okay, now's a good time to pause. It was no, I'm not pausing this thing. Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Yeah, agreed. I watched this last night and I was tired and I had to rewind a couple times. So I lost my place a few times. So I watched things multiple times. This movie, I'm going to tell you right now, we still have cast to do, but I'm going to tell you right now, when we get to the part that we always get to where we go through the movie, it's going to be different than a lot of our episodes because I feel like this movie is impossible to describe easily because it is the most kinetic thing ever. And I feel like I've seen this movie 3 full times now. I think the movies, once after, and this time, I think so 3 times maybe. I'm surprised by shit that happens during the action scenes every time because there's so much going on. It's easy to forget little nuances, right? Because it's just everything is happening. So let me finish the cast off and we'll jump into that. Charlize Theron is Imperator Furiosa, who the Furiosa movie is about, played by Anya Taylor-Joy. It's a prequel. You know her from Atomic Blonde, Monster, Aeon Flux, and I think Sex Dream I had 2 nights ago, but we'll talk about that later. Nicholas Hoult plays Nux, the War Boy, in the Superman 2025 film, directed by James Gunn and written by James Gunn. He is going to be playing Lex Luthor. He is also going to be in Robert Eggers' Nosferatu that comes out at the end of this year, and he was in Warm Bodies. Hugh Keys Byrne plays Immortan Joe, the villain of the film. You never really see his face, but if you recognize his name, or you recognize his voice, or you recognize him from the Mad Max world, that's because he's in Mad Max. He's the fucking toe cutter.
The toe cutter. He knows my name.
He is the villain of the first Mad Max film, just a different character. He died a few years ago. He was also on the television show Farscape, which I loved and was an Australian production. And when George Miller was going to make Justice League Mortal in 2009, he was hired in an unnamed role, but it was heavily rumored that he was going to be playing John Jones, the Martian Manhunter. Zoe Kravitz plays one of Immortan Joe's wives, Toast the Knowing. She is the director of the upcoming Blink Twice. I mentioned that because every time I go to the movies, I see the trailer for Blink Twice, so I'm going to go see that one. She was Catwoman in The Batman with Robert Pattinson, and she was in M. Night Shyamalan's After Earth, and she's the daughter, obviously, of Lisa Bonet and Lenny Kravitz. Riley Keough plays Capable, one of the other wives. You might know her from Magic Mike, from Logan Lucky, from It Comes at Night, or you might not know this, but she's fucking Elvis Presley's granddaughter. And besides that, she's married to the musician known as Iota, who plays the Doof Warrior in this film. That's her husband. The Doof Warrior is something to be seen if you've never seen this film before. One more cast member I'll shout out, Nathan Jones. Why do I shout out Nathan Jones? Because he has the fucking coolest name ever in this film, Rictus Erectus. It sounds like a sexual accident. From 2002 to 2003, he was a wrestler in the WWE, competitor in The World's Strongest Man, and he was a pride fighter at one point. Movie-wise, he was in the Conan the Barbarian remake with Jason Momoa, and he was in The Condemned, which was a WWE film. So there you go with the cast. There's more people in it, but we don't got all goddamn day. So Gary, we start off with Max out in the desert, long hair. He seems to have the Interceptor again, or something like the Interceptor, and it seems to have a similar fate. What happens here?
So he after gnawing on a gecko or a lizard of some kind,
a 2-headed one, by the way. No, have you noticed that? It's got 2 heads.
No, I can't. I missed it last night.
Yeah, it's got 2 heads.
And well, double the pleasure, double the fun.
That's right.
But yeah, so he takes off. Obviously, you're not hearing anything in the movie, but he takes off because he hears. I want to say toe cutters gang. He hears the gang coming up on him, and he takes off. Immortan Joe. So he's taken off to escape them, but they completely engulf him. They wreck the Interceptor because, hey, we got to see it for 5 minutes, and then they flip him over. And they capture him, to use him as a blood bag. What is the guy named? The Organic Mechanic? Is that the guy, the doctor? Yes, the Organic Mechanic.
So they've got, or Immortan Joe has his own mechanic. Now, first of all, let's just talk about Immortan Joe's setup, right? We'll see this after the initial scene with Max getting kind of roughed up. He's got this utopia, right? He's got all these brides that he apparently keeps having babies with to keep, his people going. He lives in a high up, kind of mountainside thing. He has control of water. They have food. He has a bunch of giant women that are being milked all day long to keep everybody, I guess, their bones strong. But he is a warlord, and he has this army behind him. He keeps all of these war boys who is his infantry, but they're all and they're all super devoted to him. Witness, right? What's the witness thing about, Gary?
Witness me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all about the glory, that's all about just being a fighter, live for Morton Joe, to die for Morton Joe, and to dine in Valhalla, they're loyal to the cause. They're fanatics. And it's like almost like cult, like a cult status. They're the backbone of a Morton Joe's army. And like any army, they all have different, some of them, walk on the wheels to raise and lower the ramp from the top of the citadel. They have the guards and they just everything, and drivers, and and they're all specialties, because Nux in the beginning, as he's getting his blood from Max, his backseat guy, the guy that runs the harpoon or crossbow, he grabs the steering wheel, and Nux is like, no, that's my steering wheel. He's like, well, I just got an upgrade. You can't even stand. And he's like, no, I can stand. I'll just take my blood, and just take the blood bag. And so everybody there, it's like a true army. They all have their roles, and Morton Joe has the medals on over his left breast.
Morton Joe is like Darth Vader, basically. He's all fucked up. He's got like this breathing apparatus with like a fucking like a bellows on his back. He's got like this, like you said, like this like plastic sheathing that covers him, and he's got all these medals. And if you read the comic, you see that he was a military man prior, the Vertigo comic. And as we mentioned, the organic mechanic has determined that Max is O negative or whatever it is.
O negative, high octane, universal donor.
He's universal donor, so he can give blood to anybody. So they hook Nux up to him. Nux is like, they don't say it, but Nux is like probably dying of cancer, probably radiation or something. So
he mentions that.
He says, right, he says half-life or something, right?
Yeah,
doesn't he say?
He doesn't say half-life. That is something Furiosa or the Bride say.
Okay.
He has 2 tumors on his, basically over his left clavicle.
Right.
And I can't remember, like they have 2 names, and I can't think of them, like Larry and Harry and Larry. And he draws like little smiley. He has 2 little smiley faces drawn on him.
So he's hooked up to Max. Max is like kind of suspended in this cage. They decide that he's going to go on this mission with them, and so they bring Max, and they tie Max up to the front of the vehicle with this Triton fork muzzle on his face, and he spends Mad Max, who the movie is named after, spends the first 20 minutes of this movie strapped to the front of a vehicle being driven at like 90 miles an hour and clearly not having a good time. Now, Gary, what is the mission that Morton Joe is sending Imperator Furiosa, aka Charlize Theron, who, by the way, I never knew. Like, look, Charlize Theron's hot, but Charlize Theron with like grease over her whole face, there's something there. Something happened to me. Something happened to my penis in this movie.
So her mission is supposed to be bringing mother's milk and fuel to Gastown and to the Bullet Farm. And she's supposed to, it's a trade. You have the 3 cities, and, this is the way they barter and, commerce, and keep each, city, thriving. And, but she decides in the middle of it that today is the day that she's going to return to the green place, the place where she came from. And along the way, she is smuggling the 5 brides of Morton Joe. And as she takes basically a left-hand turn, what she calls a detour. And it happens so fast. It happens right after Max is chased, around because he doesn't want to be captured by the war boys. I forgot that there's no scene of her loading, no establishing of what's going on or anything. It's immediately just takes off. And then you discover in the middle of the scene, as she's going to the green place, that she's smuggling the 5 brides.
So if watching this movie a second time or a third time, you can see when she's in the war rig before they leave, she's visibly like nervous. She's kind of like looking around and like she wants to get going. And then when she makes the detour, at one point she signals the brides with a horn honk, I think, because when she does the horn honk is when they start to crawl from the back into the cab. of the vehicle. Morton Joe figures this out with basically, and I am not going to make fun of this gentleman in any way, shape, or form because he recently passed away. But Morton Joe, one of his sons, is looks like an adult baby. He had actually, from what I was reading, this actor had the same bone condition that Mr. Glass has in Unbreakable, where like his bones just would break at a sneeze. But like when you see the movie, it's kind of shocking because he's the size of a toddler, but he has a beard. But again, guy passed away, so I'm not gonna joke around about that. But it's still kind of a shocking thing. But he sees her move and he tells his dad, and that's when Nux and all the war boys get called to go chase her down. Now, I'm going to make this kind of easy. A giant chase scene happens here. We have a lot of fucking vehicular mayhem. A lot. Gary, do you think, am I right? Is it just too hard to get into everything that happens here? Why don't we talk about this? What are some of the cool features that a Morton Joe, like what are some of the things that Morton Joe has in his army? Like, I'll go with one. Like those pole vault things where they describe this.
It's essentially a swing. Imagine, you're up on a mast. The mast can swing to and fro. Your person is perched on top of it, and they use the bend. They go back and forth to grab or like board. The war rig. It's just it's a spectacle. It's very inventive. But it like makes sense. It's like they thought about all this stuff during this chase. We're like, what would you do in the post-apocalyptic world to defend and then to get around said defenses?
What do you think is the purpose of the vehicle that houses the Doof Warrior and all that? I mean, I know in warfare, there were bands. Like, is that like an intimidation factor? What is that?
It's both.
Yeah.
For your opposition, it's intimidation. Very famously used in Desert Storm. They played the Clash, but at the same time too, if I'm riding alongside the Doof Warrior and you got those drums banging and you got the guitar blaring, and then with the flamethrower, of course, it's like, yeah, rock on. Yeah. I'm down for this. Yeah, let's do it. It's adrenaline driving and stuff. And that's really what it is. It's adrenaline, fear, fight or flight. Like you said, it's intimidation, but it's also motivation.
The actual guitar is an operational flamethrower that is not CGI. 80% of this movie is practical effects. Most of the CGI was used on some of the plant life in the areas they were filming in because there was not a lot of rain. It was a desert, but it was like an extra not rainy season, I guess. So they had to give some of the areas a little bit more lushness. And also in Imperator Furiosa's arm was CGI'd heavily. I think that there was some practical effect too.
No. See, Charlize Theron actually cut off her arm for that role, and then she had to reattach.
I mean, it's not like a physical effect. She's actually wearing a green bandana or a green glove to it's a green screen effect, and she actually broke Tom Hardy's nose during their fight scene that comes up in a minute. So these guys are trying to get her to stop, and she directs them directly into a I don't know, F5 sandstorm, which is crazy.
Yeah, there's tornadoes going on, and everything inside of it. I also think that was CGI.
Well, yes. Again, I said 80% was not, dickhead.
So, but yeah, they go into the sandstorm, and that's the first moment in the movie that you could say is where you had a beat. The first, like you said, 30, 35 minutes is Max getting captured, Max turned into a blood bag, the war rig taking off, the war rig detouring, and then Morton Joe going after the war rig. And then you finally get to the sandstorm, which, everybody gets covered in sand. And that's finally, after the sandstorm subside, is the first time that I like what I like to call catching a breath.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, you have a moment for, a little bit of, and I mean a very little bit of exposition as the brides hose themselves down with water.
They cut off their chastity belts and hose themselves down with water.
So it's that scene is where, now you're getting Max trying to disconnect himself from Nux. And it's great because when he gets up, Nux is out cold and the chain, he's like, he realizes he can't do anything with the chain that's connecting the two of them. He tries to blow Nux's arm off with the double-barreled shotgun.
Which we get the same results we got in, what was it, the second movie where it wouldn't fire?
Totally. Yeah. So it was a perfect callback. And then, he carries him back. And that's when you get to your fight, Max versus Charlize Theron. And then it turns into almost like a melee.
She's a badass because he has the brides and her held at bay with the shotgun, and he's trying to get the muzzle off of himself, but he's paying attention to them, and she takes 1 second that he's not looking and tackles him. And much like the fact that that's how brutal these characters are to each other, he tries to blow off Nux's arm. She gets the gun under his chin and pulls the trigger, and it's not loaded, right? Because she tries to kill him and it doesn't work. Then they have this wrestling match for the clip that Nux ends up helping Max with. And Max, I love the scene how Max stops her from fighting by shooting like around her head and just stopping her at that point. And they come to this kind of agreement. We're going to at least work together to get through this. We're going to get through this and figure out where to go from there. They get attacked at one point by the Porcupine Gang. That's what I call them, because that beetle or whatever it was looks like it's covered in fucking quills. So another action set there. They also end up going to, where do they end up? They end up at the Bullet Farm, or they end up at the gas town. Which one do they end up at first?
No, they don't end up. They never go to either place.
They get stuck, right?
They get stuck in the mud. At this point, during the chasing, and actually, we skipped over a huge beat.
Oh, okay, go
because during the chasing, before the Porcupine Gang, they're supposed to go through the pass with the bikers, and they were supposed to arrange safe travel with the bikers, and they're like, you said like 1 or 2 vehicles chasing you, not 3 war parties.
Right. And
she's like, she calls Max fool, and then he takes off. She jumps in, but then you get Immortan Joe, and I can't remember the name. I can't remember the name of all of his machines. I used to know this all by heart, but the silver, like 41 styled Ford pickup monster truck is chasing after him and does that big practical jump that, people couldn't believe, like that wasn't CGI. No, monster trucks do jump. That's when Rosie Huntington Whiteley's character, one of the brides, married to Jason Statham, also known for Transformers 3. And,
nerd.
But she's pregnant. She's very pregnant. She's about to pop. Yeah, that's when you get the iconic scene of her hanging out the door as like, Immortan Joe, this is the reason why you're not winning. It's me. I'm the one that did that. And then she tumbles and falls out. And then essentially, the other brides are like, we got to go back for her. And Max is like, no, she went under the wheel.
Yeah. She got run over. We get a scene a little bit later in the back of the vehicle where the organic mechanic, right?
Yeah. Cause that's now we're at the point where they're stuck.
Yes. Yeah.
So now they're stuck. And that's when it's all come about like, I can't remember if it's the Bullet Farmer or the Man-Eater says, all this for a petty family squabble.
I think I mentioned this earlier, Gary. I fell asleep in this one a couple times and had to rewind. So I definitely, my brain's a little scrambled on this one.
I mean, there's certain beats, and I just want to make sure I'm hitting the beats.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it.
I really like this movie. I'm not going to spoil anything as a purveyor of Mad Max films and enjoyer. And I will admit, this is the one I've seen the least. I think this was my 3rd time watching it.
Okay.
Just because of where my life was when this movie came out and what my life has been since. But this was my 3rd time watching it. There is a lot of small things that tell this big story, which has a very linear, like this is the plot on this is very thread. It's like
it's a chase movie.
It is.
Yeah.
But you get through little things, you get to know about this world inside the Citadel and, the green place, that everybody just feeds you with a little exposition here, or the other thing too. Like I think this won 2 Oscars if I remember right, and I think it was for costuming was the other one.
Or
it might have been nominated and lost to Suicide Squad. Like there's things in the you pay attention to what the characters are wearing and everything. There's the attention to detail in this chase movie is storytelling in itself.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that at all. What town is it that when they're stuck in the mud, Max goes back and comes back all bloodied?
That's the bullet farmer. The bullet farmer's shooting at him, and he's trying to shoot at it with the sniper rifle, which they only have 4 bullets for. He wastes 3 bullets, and then Charlize Theron looks at Max and he's like, "Yeah, here, take it."
Yeah,
and she rests it on his shoulder. She shoots out the halogen lamp. That's the spotlight that's searching for them. And at that point, the bullet farmer goes blind, and he wraps the I don't want to call it a blindfold, but the rag around him. And he says, "I am justice," and he just starts shooting randomly. It's just, and that's when Max goes after him.
Yeah. And then Max comes back and one of the brides is like, "You're bleeding." And Furios is like, "That's not his blood." Yeah.
No.
I like that scene too. I like that whole blue aesthetic.
Yes.
Going from the all red kind of stuff we're seeing to this overall blue temperature feel, I thought was pretty interesting. We end up where Furiosa doesn't know it, but we end up in the green place eventually. But it's not the green place anymore, right, Gary?
No, it's been ravaged by time.
Yeah.
And
I like the imagery of the woman on this, she looks like one of those Landstriders from the Dark Crystal, where she's on the stilts, right? Walking around the swamp area.
Yeah, that was as they were leaving the where they were stuck, and you saw the crows.
Yeah.
To me, that was another callback to the Mad Max 2 Road Warrior, because that's in that opening with the crows and everything when he's leaving the burial site of his wife and child.
Right. So
to me, that was a great callback, but they're all walking on stilts and they all have the easiest way to say is they look like Raptor for G.I. Joe.
Oh, Jesus. Here he goes. We're going to start talking about Quick Kick now.
They go there. And that's the first stop. That's, like you said, that is the green place. And they keep going because she doesn't think she's been there yet. She doesn't get there until they get to the power line tower, where
right.
the naked lady that I'm sure you might have enjoyed was, looking out.
What are they called? The Volvani? Is that what they were called?
Yes.
In this, yeah, the Volvani, the elder women of that area. So we get there, the chase continues, but Max decides at some point that it's pointless to go any further, right? So he decides what makes more sense.
To go back and take control of the Citadel.
Right. He knows that Immortan Joe himself is outside of the Citadel. He's brought all of his power players out. We know Rictus Erectus is there, and the people watching it are essentially the war boys. Some of them, the son, the very uncapable, physically defenseless son, and we didn't mention it earlier, but yes, there are a bunch of people that seem to live around the Citadel, but they're clearly slaves. They're clearly beholden by the gift of water once in a while. And exactly what happens to Immortan Joe by them at the end of the movie is not a surprise. So I think Max knows that they're not going to have fealty to him. They're not like the war boys. They're not, they're not fucking spraying they're not getting high on chrome paint or whatever it is, to be closer to this guy. There's a great scene early in the movie where Nux is driving and he's riding alongside Immortan Joe and he yells out, "Immortan Joe!" And Immortan Joe looks at him and he's fucking starstruck. It just goes to show the Jim Jones level that this guy has over these people, right? So Max says, let's go back. And where do we go from here, Gary?
So it's basically a 180 turn towards the Citadel. So they're going to go straight through Immortan Joe's people and the people eater. So they're going to go right. They're just going to try to go right through. They're going to go through the same pass, and and they're going to. It's just basically, it's almost like a suicide run,
Right.
but it was the choice was you can ride for 160 days in the opposite direction, and all you're going to get is sand.
Yeah, you're gonna drive on desert forever, and nothing's gonna come good from that. That's not survivable. Also, we didn't mention it, but I think it's important to mention a little bit earlier in the movie, Nux attempted to take the war rig and failed horribly, and kind of made himself look like a fool in front of Immortan Joe, and he is inconsolable, and he starts like a weird little love affair with Elvis Presley's granddaughter. So they're really into each other, and he starts to become part of this little gang, helping them out as well. Yeah. So,
right, and then the other thing too, because you mentioned that, that was an internet meme for a while after this movie came out, was because when he failed, Immortan Joe looked at him again and said mediocre.
Right. Yes.
That was a meme for a while. Oh man.
Yes, I remember him saying that. I did not realize that was a meme. That's pretty good. Mediocre is a hard word, right? Like you can tell someone you're a fuck up. You can say a lot, but the word mediocre is just so fucking like, you don't want to hear that ever in life. There's no point where you want to hear that.
Yeah, remember when you screwed up as a kid and your parents were like, "I'm so disappointed in you."
Disappointed is worse than angry.
Yeah. You'd be like, "Oh man!" But imagine if your dad just walked in and was like, John, mediocre, and walked out.
I cannot think of a time in my life specifically, but I know that I have said to somebody in my life at some point, like, I am not fucking mad at you, but I'm super disappointed. And like, I realized like, ooh, that stings. Like that stings. I'd rather have someone be mad at me than disappointed in me. And yeah, mediocre. That's just tough. So they start to head back the other way. Gary, I'm going to let you get us all the way back to the Citadel. So kind of just give us a very brief description of some of the incredible action that we're going to see here and some of the battles we're going to see.
So it's essentially at this point, it's Road Warrior on steroids.
Yeah.
And, the vehicles now all have purpose. One of my favorite parts was he had multiple vehicles that had, tractor or backhoe like spikes to plant. So they would have a harpoon gun, loaded in the front of the gun or loaded in the front of the vehicle, which they would shoot into the war rig. And then they would drop, the spikes into the ground as like anchors.
Right.
To slow it down. You get the guys on the pole vault swinging and back and forth again. And
Max ending up on the Doof Warriors rig, just kind of getting caught up in he gets caught up in the elastics with the Doof Warrior.
Yep. And then also at one point, he also goes from the Doof Warriors rig, he goes over to the Man-Eaters. And when they're like, oh no, he's over there, they shoot Man-Eater. Like Max is like, yeah, body shield.
Yeah.
And the other thing too that I realized on this watch was that vehicle was also a war rig. It was a different style, but it was a tractor trailer. And I didn't realize that on the rewatch until I rewatched it.
I don't know if I realized it either. There's so much going on. You get some fights with Rictus, where he's just picking Max up left and right, and eventually one of the brides, does she actually turn on them, or was it like a ploy? Like she jumps from one vehicle over to Rictus. Right.
So Zoe Kravitz's character gets snatched.
Right.
She gets snatched, and she gets put into the dual caddy monster truck that at this point Immortan Joe's in. And then like you said, the other one's like, no, I want to be there. I really don't want to be with, Furiosa. I really want to be with you. And so they bring her over, but she went over there to bring over Furiosa and to bring over the other brides.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And then Rictus went over to the war rig as Nux is driving. And then the monster of Rictus Erectus, at this point is he rips off the blower housing
yes,
off the motor number 2 off the war rig. And you just see the fire going everywhere. And
yeah, he's a fucking strong man. Furiosa has been stabbed in the side by one of the marauders. She leaves the rig. Nux is now driving the rig, and he basically comes up to the final idea of he's going to have to make a sacrifice to stop all of this. Furiosa gets over to the caddy monster truck, and with the help of Toast the Knowing, ends up. What does she do? She shoves Morton Joe's like mask into the wheel, and it rips like his bottom half of his face off, I think.
Yeah.
She says like, do you remember me? And she throws it. And I guess I'm assuming that's going to tie into Furiosa, or at least her anger there. We're going to see more of like the reason why in the prequel. But so yeah, she throws that in there. It rips his face off. He's dead. They start telling everybody he's dead. So, but Rictus Erectus is not going to stop. So what does Nux do to finish him off and to basically make sure that nobody else can pass?
He basically rolls over the war rig as it gets to that narrow gap and sacrifices himself and the war rig. Big explosion, and you have the 3D effect, because this was a 3D movie, of the steering wheel going right into the center of the screen.
I didn't read into that, but when that happened, I said, was this a 3D release? I didn't remember that. Okay. All right. Cause I said that is, if this was not a 3D release, that is the most 3D shot in a non 3D release ever. Yeah. Like the steering wheel with like a Morton Joe skull logo.
Yeah. It actually, that skull looked like General Grievous.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So all that's over with now. They head back to the Citadel, and as they pull in, the bridge part starts to come down, but they stop and they demand to see who's in the vehicle. Max is driving. He gets out. On the front of the vehicle, there's something in a bag. He pulls off the bag, and it is fucking a Morton Joe's like fucking ripped apart body. Well, his face is ripped apart. He's dead.
Yep.
Throws him to the ground, and he just gets ripped apart by all these fucking people that hate his fucking guts. And then Furiosa, who's been stabbed, beaten, bruised, steps out of the vehicle. Her prosthetic arm is gone, and the people love her. She is now like, right? She's the popular choice, Gary.
Yeah. And you got to remember, nobody really knows what happened.
Right.
And Morton Joe took all of the important people, other than his, lack of a better term, little son, with him. So nobody knew really about the brides coming back or why they'd be back. I don't think it was really public knowledge that Furiosa had stolen them.
Do you think that when they got back, Furiosa threw that adult baby into like a ditch or something, like off the top deck? Do you think that's what happened?
I think, I don't think Furiosa is that kind of person in the wasteland, but he's probably got a different job that's much more menial.
Yeah. So she comes back. She's a conquering hero. It ends with her and the brides like getting back on to the lift. And as they're going up, though, Gary, what do we get? We get a moment of eye contact, but where's Max? He's not with her.
Max is in the crowd, ready to fade out, to walk away, to go somewhere else, because he doesn't really like being around people.
Yeah,
he's always he always is the reluctant hero.
And we get like what is the perfect ending. Like, obviously, Furiosa, I don't know if it was originally supposed to be a prequel when they were going to make it at the same time as this. I'm assuming they were going to make it into another movie with Charlize Theron's version of the character. But like, it's kind of sad that it's been 10 years and we never got anything else with Tom Hardy, Mad Max. And we probably aren't at this point, unless, George Miller's in his 80s, unless they pass this down to somebody else. Because like that's like you said earlier, we were talking about it. That's kind of this character's modus operandi. He's a wanderer. He floats from area to area and from adventure to adventure, and we haven't seen. And I think I read at one point that Tom Hardy either signed for 3 movies or was going to sign for 3 movies. but it's 2024 now, and there's been no talk about this at all.
Yeah, I think he's busy with Venom right now. But seriously though, he could do it. It wouldn't be at this point. I would be okay with him again. I think he did it very well.
Yeah, agreed.
I think his performance was good. I didn't see, Mel Gibson isn't in this movie. This is Max. Small on words. His actions were there. And honestly, I didn't get any of that animosity on the set. If anything, that anger or confusion or whatever only served the purpose of the movie. Because, like you said, the movie is so frenetic.
Yeah, it's crazy. This movie is just, it's pretty nonstop. Like you said, there's a couple moments where we get to breathe, and they're needed because, like this might be in 300 plus episodes of The Pint, the movie that I had the hardest time thinking about how we were going to break down, because there's so much that happens in every action scene that if you said to me, tell me exactly how everything goes from the beginning of this chase moment to the end of this chase moment, like what are all the moving parts? I couldn't do it. Like, like we were talking about at the end where he's jumping from rig to rig, and there's so much happening with all these characters that it's crazy. The Road Warrior is very similar. Like there's a lot going on in the Road Warrior, but it's nowhere near as much as what's going on in this movie.
The other thing too with the Road Warrior, it's only the final third of the movie.
Correct. Yeah, you're right.
This movie, there's, you have it is like you said, it's one chase scene movie, right? But you really have the opening of Max getting captured, and that which moves to Charlize Theron's taking off in the war rig. And then from there, that starts the chase. The chase kind of, soft end with the sandstorm, where then you get into the Max and Furiosa fight, which then ends with the chase part 2. Ends with them getting stuck. Then you get the bullet farmer for a few minutes. Then they finally get to the Volvani. Then finally, it's the final chase scene. So it's broken down into, I would call them bits,
right?
But like you said, it's very smooth. It's not like, oh, here's a break in the scene. No, it's like, no, this is the natural progression of what happened next.
All right, let's talk about the box office.
This country, you got to make the money first.
All right, so this is for the week ending of May 17th of 2015. I am amazed at the disparity between number 2 and number 1 that weekend. Number 5, Furious 7, had been out for 7 weeks. It made $3.6 million. Number 4, a film called Hot Pursuit that I have no idea what it is. Out for 2 weeks, it had made $5.7 million. Number 3, out for 3 weeks from a little known franchise called the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was Avengers Age of Ultron, bringing in $38.9 million. At number 2, opening that weekend, it made $45 million. It was Mad Max Fury Road. And number 1, crushing Mad Max Fury Road and opening as well at $69 million. Pitch Perfect 2. It made $25 million more, which I get it. It's I like it. I'm a Pitch Perfect fan. But like, holy shit, it kicked the fuck out of Mad Max Fury Road. But that's okay. That's all right. Not everything, it's not a popularity contest, but it actually surprised me. If you had said to me, did Mad Max Fury Road win its opening weekend in 2015? I would have said 100%, no doubt. And it did not. So, all right, let's rate this fucking thing.
Hit me with it. Just give it to me straight.
All right, one more time before we rate this, let's not forget Paul Prezalta over at the Countdown Podcast. Incredible podcast, about to hit 500 episodes, about to end. They're going to be doing, I guess, some movie review stuff, but much less frequently. Him and Wayne are just incredible podcast hosts. Their show is incredible. It really is like the most polished, fun show out there. I love it. I'm going to miss it. And I'm very glad to have gotten to know these guys through podcasting all the way out there in Perth, Australia. But Paul, we know you love this movie, So here we go. Let's talk about how we feel about it. I'm going to go first. I love the Mad Max films. I have not seen Furiosa yet, so I can't speak on that, but I do love the films. Even Thunderdome is like a good half of a movie. That being said, I'll admit it right now, and this is not going to be popular with Paul. I prefer 1 and 2 over this. I prefer Mad Max, and I prefer The Road Warrior in particular. I watch The Road Warrior every year. I love it. George Miller set out to make a 2-hour-long chase movie. He did it. He did it as well as it could be done. It's beautiful. It's incredible. The action is out of this world. There's just not a lot of a story here. And I feel like there's not as much character development here as we get in like the Road Warrior, say. Like, I feel like the people we meet in the Road Warrior, the people that live, in the where they have the gasoline. Like, I feel like we had a little bit more development, like with blonde Mick Jagger and the chick from Farscape. I think we had more development there, even a tiny bit. I felt like I knew those characters a little bit more. I also think Road Warrior, you can't, like, a Morton Joe doesn't beat fucking Lord Humongous and the Schmegma Crazies or whatever they're called. I love the Road Warrior, and admittedly, I also prefer the Jewish hating Mel Gibson as Max Rockatansky. So I gave that movie a 5. I can't give this a 5. But for what this movie does, for as amazing as its fight choreography and its costuming and its music, Junkie XL's soundtrack is awesome. This is a sight to behold. I'm going to give it a 4.5. I give this 4.5 out of 5. I really do enjoy this movie. So don't take that wrong, but it's just even Mad Max, the earlier films just stick with me more. And this isn't like, one of those, old versus new or original. I just feel like those two are better overall movies. This one is an incredible action sequence. So that's what I go. I go 4.5. Gary, give us your 5. Just fucking do it. Just do it, Gary.
No, I want to hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to keep you in suspense.
All right, fair.
The biggest criticism of this movie, and on this rewatch, and I saw it, is Mad Max is arguably
a secondary character to
Furiosa.
Absolutely.
In this film.
Yeah.
And at that point, is it right to call this Mad Max Fury Road? But what else do you call it to draw in the audience?
Fury Road, a Mad Max saga, much like they did with Furiosa. I agree with you. I didn't even bring that up. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Look at the poster or the Blu-ray cover. It's Max in the background looking forward and Charlize Theron looking at the audience. This is her movie, right? And maybe that's why her and Tom Hardy didn't get along. Maybe Tom Hardy didn't read the script well enough. And when he showed up on day one and realized, holy shit, this is like Mad Max. Again, Max is not almost, but he fades into the background even in his own movie, in like The Road Warrior, right? There are moments he has like minuscule amount of lines. So like they kept up with that, but it's worse in this one. He is definitely secondary in this one.
Yeah. But the other thing too is in the other movies, while he had minuscule lines, he was still the focus.
Right.
It wasn't like, oh, okay, well, we're going to go to Papagallo and his people now. It never was like that. In this movie, it was like, okay, Max is here, but reality is we want to focus on the brides in Furiosa. So in that way, I think on this rewatch, I finally saw it for myself, and I agree with that criticism. That being said, the movie in itself, his wife did an amazing job with editing. She made some incredible decisions. I don't know if you notice, there's parts of the movie that are sped up just a little bit. And I think that's a George Miller trait too. He did that in some of in the earlier Max films. So there is elements of Mad Max. There's elements of Road Warrior used in making this movie. And this movie is, as far as I'm concerned, almost flawless in the execution of this chase movie. Like the beats hit, everything hits. I mean, kept me awake till almost midnight when I had been up since 4 a.m. So, I mean, this thing is a kick-ass movie, but it's is it fair to call it a Mad Max movie? So that, and I know you do quarter scales, but you know what? This movie is a 5.0.
You all that. You're such a fucking cocksucker. I knew you were going to do that. All that. Oh, I'm going to keep you in suspense. 5.0. 5.0. There you go, Paul. You got your 5.0 out of G.I. Gary. I'm sticking by my guns. This is a 4.5, but it's still a great time, man. And again, the use of not a lot of CGI is so impressive for a 2015 film that has this much mayhem in it, this much crazy ass mayhem. Okay, so that's our review of Mad Max Fury Road, a pint insider dedication for the great Paul Prezolta. Gary, I'm not going to mention anything about the pint from this point forward. Why don't you tell all the listeners out there all about your show, about your brand new co-host? Let's hear all about it.
I host the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod. It is a G.I. Joe and military and adventure toy line based podcast. We basically cover vehicles, playsets, or even trailers from the G.I. Joe Real American Hero toy line from 1982 to the present day, focusing mostly on the O-ring G.I. Joes from 82 to 94. We also talk about the comic books, basically looking at new releases currently from Skybound Entertainment, the Energon universe, and the original Larry Hama run. And then we also dip our toes into other toy lines that are coming out. There's a O-ring essentially renaissance with companies like Delta 17, Operation Recall, Call Sign Longbow. So we talk about all that kind of stuff. At the core of the show, it really is G.I. Joe, a real American hero, what we grew up on in the 80s. So, yep. After 3 years, I found somebody that could work with my incredibly late schedule. That's Casey. He also does podcasts from the pit. It's a YouTube podcast. He came on. He's great. He adds a different viewpoint. He's a little older, so he has different memories, which we bounce from.
Gary, I've told you before, and it's not because we're buddies and we go way back. I love your show. I listen to every episode. I just yesterday or 2 days ago listened to your episode about the Wolverine and Lady J, and I loved it. I love the way you break things down. I could picture these toys, and then what I love about it is as we've talked about a million times, is that I'm older than you, so my G.I. Joe memories are from 82 to about 86, and yours are obviously a little bit further than that. But I even love listening to the stuff that I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, because it gives me a perspective on, boy, am I lucky I got out of G.I. Joe when I did, because man, does it sound like a bunch of fucking lame bullshit after about 86. But yeah, no, like you did the whole a couple episodes, or at least one episode about the Iron Grenadiers, which is after my time. And I don't know. I really, really, really enjoy your show. And I've enjoyed the inclusion of Casey as well. So keep it up. And everybody out there that listens to the pint, if you're even remotely interested in some vintage toy and current and vintage comic talk, go check it out. Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod. You can find it on every podcatcher out there. All right, Paul, this one was for you. Until next time, see ya.
See ya.
It's over, Johnny. It's over! Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off!